was Barrow's view. I remember during the by-election we had that brought Richie Haynes to the House of Assembly. One night in Britton Hill around just about 1 in the morning, Errol Barrow was invited to speak. And he began his speech by saying, look, it is 1 o'clock in the morning. I've spent most of my political life being accused of talking too much history and talking too much philosophy. Those of you who don't want to hear any history or philosophy are free to leave now, because that is what I'm going to talk. Because if you don't know where you came from, you can't know where you are or where you're going. And if you don't have a philosophy, you have nothing to guide you to ensure that you are properly steered and going to the right destination. So the Democratic Labour Party has a version of itself based on that as well. And so we've done politics, we've done power, we've done party, we've looked at philosophy. That philosophy, of course, always leads us to ensure that power is being used for the benefit and the upliftment of the people who need it most. And you only have to look at what is happening in Barbados today to understand the importance of all of this, because the people who are benefiting from the way power is being used in Barbados today are not the people who need it most. And then quickly, this policy. Your next P, policy. Policy is guided and it's connected to all that I said before, the policies with which we have come up are all based on our philosophy, all also based on how we believe that power should be used. I'll give you an example of that. We had a policy that the lands of plantation tenants should be acquired and transferred to the tenants. That policy is contained in our 1961 manifesto. The truth is that at the time when we articulated the policy, there was an acute shortage of land surveyors in Barbados. Any surveyors plan you took up either had on the name Graham Giddens or Darrell Gomez. There were very few land surveyors in Barbados, maybe 1 or 2 other names. So land surveyors had to be trained first before we could deal with that issue. We did not get a chance to implement that policy because it was implemented by the other side. And nothing wrong with that. We supported it when it was implemented because it was a good policy. So if you're consistent on policy, it really doesn't matter whether you do the implementing or whether your adversary does it. You support it because good policy is good policy. And we always believed that plantation tenants were entitled to own the lots that they were on. We were not able to move from policy to program, which is your next P, because, as I said, we didn't have the requisite manpower, surveying manpower, to do the huge volume of work that would have had to be done to get the policy through. So outside of policy then, the actual implementation comes through your next P, which is your programs. Well, we now live and operate in an environment where the operational model in Barbados now is to put the cart before the horse. So you put on your shoes and make sure they're on, and then you start looking around for your socks. But we always made sure that we subjected to prolonged study and to inveterate acquaintance those initiatives that we wanted to move from policy to programs for implementation. That is why we did that with nursery education when we were last in office. We also did it with the reforms in education that we introduced. Now, I took the position, and the Minister of Education and other members of the Cabinet agreed that you really can't talk about reforming education in Barbados and leave all the schools where you found them, do nothing about narrowing the gap between the schools, when in fact one of the most divisive issues in Barbados is the issue of the school tie. Now, we tackled that issue, and we tackled it because amongst the many programs that we introduced during our time, during those 33 years in government, we built Springer Memorial Secondary School. We opened LSD Secondary School for Independence in 1966. We built St. George Secondary School. We built the Garrison Secondary School. We built St. Lucie Secondary School. We built Dayton Griffith Secondary School. We laid the foundation for the building of St. James Secondary School. We started the St. Thomas Secondary School but couldn't finish it because of the inflationary conditions arising in the early 1990s. So the Labour Party came in and finished it and named it, no problem. Good policy, and we didn't mind that. But we felt that with this whole new educational outfit, we had to narrow the gap between those schools, or some of them, and what were traditionally called the older secondary schools. And we put sixth form programs in some of those schools. And those programs remain in place, and we feel comforted by all of that because we subjected those policies to, as I said, prolonged study and to inveterate acquaintance. So you have your power, you have your politics, you have your power, you have your party, you have your philosophy, you have your policy, you have your program. Let me come now to priorities. The difference between the Democratic Labour Party and the Barbados Labour Party, very simple. On my way here, I heard a very interesting news item that a new headquarters is going to be built for the Barbados Defense Force in St. George. And of course, as if I had forgotten, that all that belt of land where St. Anne's Fort now is supposed to become, is supposed to be developed for tourism. So that was not any creative thought coming from anywhere. It was always that part of the bargain was you have to give up that land for tourism development, so find somewhere to put the defense force. And we are now told, based on what I heard on my way here, that the defense force is going into St. George. No plan yet? Well, the carrot has now moved ahead. The horse will come later. The horse will come later. I'm not surprised about any of this. We have always, as a party, concentrated on the smaller and more personal and more human projects in Barbados. We build schools because we know that every household in Barbados benefits from a school either directly or indirectly. These big, grandiose things, you know, we've always steered clear of all of that. Granny Adams did the harbor, nothing very good. Errol Barr did the airport there. It was not opened by us, but it was built by us. And it was named by the Labour Party, but built by us. I think the last major physical development project the Labour Party did, and that we are still paying for, I know that the payments are supposed to come to an end in 2033, is the prison. While we are busy building schools, they're busy building prisons. The late Gordon Matthews has gone to his grave, an angry man, because he said that had the then minister listened to him, Glenderry would not have broken down, would not have been burnt down, because he kept warning that something was happening up there. Because he was connected with up there, and nobody listened to him. And but the interesting thing about that period was that once it got burnt down, media personnel began to praise the then minister for how well she conducted her press conferences. Prison burned down, you know. When nobody ain't discussing the burnt down prison, it is how well the minister was conducting her press conferences. But in terms of priorities, our priorities are human and personal. And to the extent that any policy or project was to claim our attention and to get our acquiescence, we had to be satisfied on the extent to which its positive effects were going to be felt by the people in the country. They've always liked the big, splashy thing. I hear some things on the social media that are happening in Barbados. I don't know about you, but I look around, I don't see any of these things happening, but I hear these fantastic advertisements about all this development taking place in Barbados, and I don't see it. They've employed some woman with a fascinating voice to tell you these tall stories about all these big things happening in Barbados, and when you look around, you can't see any evidence of it at all. But it comes down to this, when it comes to priorities. When you go to the supermarket, there will always be, in the supermarket, people who can afford to buy more than you can afford to buy, And there will be people who cannot afford to buy as much as you can afford to buy. When you go to the gas station, the same thing happens. There are people who can afford to tell the gas attendant, fill me up. The fellow who just wants to make it home says, give me $20 there. And you may be somewhere in between there. There are always persons who can do better than you and people who can't do as well as you. But let me tell you what the good news is. Let me tell you what is what I call the equilibrating element in all of this. What applies in the supermarket or what applies at the gas station does not apply in the polling booth. No matter how wealthy a man is, no matter how poor a man or a woman is, their vote carries the same weight. And that is why rich people don't like to see poor people voting. Because the idea that their vote carries the same weight as mine does not appeal to them at all. And therefore, that is one of the principal reasons we have to ensure that we get past this unfortunate tendency to say we are too angry to vote. I am bothering to vote. Your vote equates to driving a vehicle and your hand being on the steering wheel. If you take your hands off the steering wheel, you cannot be heard to complain about where the vehicle goes. Wherever it ends up, you have to be happy about. So in terms of our priorities, we continue to be personal and human, but we also want to ensure that people understand their importance in the whole scheme of things, in the entire scheme in Barbados. Our priorities are not the grandiose, blinding projects. We do them. They create jobs and provide employment and so on, but our concept of development is personal and human. Social and economic in quantity, but personal and human in quality. And I said my last P was going to be projection. I said projection because we didn't want to keep all of this for ourselves here in Barbados. So on the 27th of June 1965, Errol Barrow wrote a letter to Forbes Burnham of Guyana saying, look, we have to take the Caribbean to another level, and I would like you to come to Barbados in a week's time. Let's talk this thing through. And they did that. They had the conversation. As a result of that conversation, the decision was taken to establish a Caribbean Free Trade Area, which later matured into what we know as CARICOM today, so that the presence of the Democratic Labour Party has been felt not only here in Barbados, but across the Caribbean as well. And we have a lot to be proud about in that regard. So the version of who we are, the real version of who we are, is all that I just said here to you this evening. We got to where we are 33 years in government out of 69 years of existence, 7 elections won out of, well, 16 now, but the last 2, this 2018 election, there will be questions that will be answered about that in the fullness of time, and the mock election of 2022, we can forget that. But that's the real version of who we are. And that is the version that must now take center stage with our new leader, our new political leader, Ralph Thorne. You know, there has been a flourishing industry in the Democratic Labour Party. It really flourishes. And it goes back to 1994, the month of September. That industry is called taking the name of FREUNDEL STUART in vain. So whenever you can't find who to blame for anything, you can't go wrong if you blame FREUNDEL STUART. That industry has really flourished over time. So, not surprisingly, when Mr. Thorne came over to the Democratic Labour Party, the person who was blamed and is being blamed is your humble servant, even now. All right? By the way, I am not ashamed of that. I have known Ralph Thorne. I met Ralph Thorne in 1982. He was in law school in Trinidad. And we developed a friendship way back then. And that friendship subsists to this day. When Ralph Thorne did his legal training, his in-service training, he did his in-service training with attorney at law, our own Morris Athelston King. And he's had a very distinguished practice as a lawyer, both here in Barbados and in other parts of the Caribbean, particularly Guyana, where he and my colleague and friend Hal Gollop have done some remarkable work for the government of Guyana. Ralph, let me say no, has the character, the capacity, and the courage. Those 3 C's, character, capacity, and courage, to be not only the political leader of the Democratic Labour Party, but whatever else flows from that. All the years I've known him, in Ralph Anthony Thorne, I've never found any guile. Very rounded and well-read man. He and I shared a very precious friend among us, or between us, the late George Lamin, on whose considerable authority and wisdom we were both able to draw over the years. And Ralph ran on the Democratic Labour Party's platform in 1994, he spoke on my platform in St. Martin, St. Philip. I spoke on his platform in Eden Lodge. And that process was repeated in 1999. I said he was a man of character. He has the character. I better say what I mean by character, though. The English word character comes from a Greek word character, which means an impress or stamp or an engraving. Could even mean a scratch sometimes. And when I say that Ralph has the character to be the political leader of the Democratic Labour Party and anything else that flows from that, I intend to say no more than that. Wherever he goes, anything he touches, he leaves his impress, his stamp. And I think that we are the better off for having him. I hope that coming out of meetings like this, I better not say this meeting, but coming out of meetings like this, that we'll get past the old childish and silly personal debates and get around to dealing with the real version of ourselves. If one person voted for us in 2022, one person, we owe that person a duty for sticking their neck out and standing with us in a difficult situation. And there are people out there who are waiting on us to put their case. There are some who have repented their errors and are ready for a change from what we have now. And we cannot even appear to be obstructing them in that quest. I think that we now have to determine to rally behind the political leader of the party and let us get on with the serious work that has to be done. Let us stop subscribing to all of the misleading narratives about the Democratic Labour Party and what it is and what it means and what we have a real version of ourselves, and I shared it or attempted to share it with you here this evening under 8 P's. And the time has come for us to turn the corner now. Enough of the pettiness and the childishness. You have not, but the word urinal does not begin with P. Anybody who wants to boast that they did so much for the DLP because they put in urinals, I've never been a wealthy man. I've never been a wealthy man. But if urinals are the problem, or painting an auditorium is the problem, I am prepared to make myself responsible for replacing the urinals, give them back their urinals, and I will make myself responsible for that. And not only that, if they also want the toilet bowl, I will make myself responsible for replacing that too. I'm not a wealthy man, but I will do that. On one condition, though, that a precondition to that kind of parting is that we must have photographers posted at the entrance of the Democratic Labour Party so that when they're going through the gate with them on their shoulders, photographs can be taken and we can get on with our business. But we have to get past this. Politics is about power and the use of that power to lift people up. It's not about these frivolous debates. And in conclusion, let me say this. My real conclusion now. Because all of us have to be concerned about the wasteland in which we are now living called Barbados, where nothing is working. If you got a pretty garbage can, but you can't get in the garbage trucks. You can't afford what's in the supermarket. Light bills frighten you. I heard the anguished voice of a woman on a call-in program this week carrying on about the floor telephone bill she got. I thought she was going to have a cardiac arrest. She was so agitated about all that. The wasteland features about all of this. And we have to rise to the occasion. T.S. Eliot, the poet, Thomas Stearns Eliot wrote a poem called The Wasteland. And he asked some very pertinent questions. He asked, in this wasteland, having settled all the things that were wrong and so on, he said, but what are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? He went on, Son of man, you cannot say or guess, because you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats, the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. That is our wasteland. And it is time that the Democratic Labour Party now rises up to prove that anybody who got a certain amount of votes should not be got rid of by fewer than that number of votes. If that argument were correct, I know that Erskine Sandiford got nearly 4,000 votes in St. Michael's South in the 1991 general election, and 16 people in the House of Assembly brought him down in a no confidence motion. But we have to get past all of this and get on with the business of real politics, which is about power and how power is being used in the society. So thanks again for having me. Thanks for your patience. And I look forward to being around. Thank you very much.